All right, good evening. Good to see you. Let's open our Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I don't know exactly how far I'm going to get tonight, but most likely not as far as I would expect to get. That would be typical, which no smart aleck remarks from the peanut gallery there on that one. But anyway, It'll all depend on you, not me. See, there we are. No pressure. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we have been talking about spiritual gifts, and these 3 chapters are really important, even though we're living, of course, in a time in which these miraculous gifts are not being used anymore because the scriptures have been completed, as we have seen before when we've read the last part of chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. And we won't spend too much on that, but we'll make sure that everybody understands that particular part. But first and foremost, let's just very briefly summarize. Let me very briefly summarize the chapter 12, which would be introduction to chapters 13 and 14. So just a few things. I'm summarizing some things. First, Corinthians, Christians, it's not about you, and it's not about your gift. This is not what it's about. It's about the body. It's about building up the body, and that's the emphasis that he gives all the way through chapter 12. And these gifts, these are gifts, and you know we just kind of go right over that, but you didn't produce it. The Spirit gave the gift to you. You have been given a gift. How do you exalt yourself concerning a gift? It doesn't make you better than someone else. And then he talked about how many members but one body. And I wanted to remind you on the screen here that when he's using members here, this is referring to you have a gift, and yet these gifts all fit within a bigger body, a bigger corporate group. And so your gift, or you being a member there, is something that should complement other gifts in the congregation. And that same thing is true without the miraculous. We talked about that quite a bit last week, that as members we all have something to contribute in the body, and therefore each of us is trying to work together just like a body would function. And therefore the emphasis there, but I wanted you to make sure we saw that in that time what they're doing is all of these gifts were necessary for the body to function in the revealing of God's Word, doing evangelism, building up the body, growing to maturity. All those gifts made that possible. Whereas today, since we already have the revelation, then we concentrate more on equipping ourselves so that every one of us in our functioning in the body complements each other. And the work is done there. Every member then and every gift should be appreciated. You don't want to remove a member of a body. You don't want to remove a gift out of the work of the church there. It's all very important, just as it is today. And so that's just the setup then for chapter 13 here. All right, so let's just notice chapter 12:31, and I'm going to note that chapter divisions, there you go. All right, so chapter 12:31. But earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. Great introduction then to chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away, and as for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away, for we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child and thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Okay, so let's take step by step here. First, and this, if you're visiting with us Sunday evenings, we most of the time do some class type situations. So let's start with this big overview, how, without getting into a detail of the text, because we'll come back to that, if you were just to summarize the message of this chapter, 12:31 through 13:13, how would you give a summary? What would be your, I think it's talking about what Paul is talking, basically this. What is his main message here? I want to jump in here. Sorry, Mara, I didn't see you there. You're being a little timid. You know. Okay. I love the fact that we have members who jump in and give guesses. All praise.
That even though you might have a guess, love is better, and everybody can do that.
Good. So these gifts are great, as he says in 12:31 here. These gifts are great, but there's something much greater than this. Right, and this, how you use the gifts, maybe that's the way to say it. How you use these gifts is more important than the gift itself. How you treat one another is more important than the gift itself. Good. You might have a different.
And plus, there is a wrong way to use the gift.
There you are. You could use it incorrectly. In other words, you're using it and man, you're great, but you don't have love for the other person. You're not using it out of love for the group and the congregation and other members, using it maybe to exalt yourself or other things, then your gift is really no good. Yeah, Matt?
What occurs to me is I immediately think about the description of God. God is love, and we're made in his image. This is Paul encouraging us to live up to the way in which we were made to be in the image of God.
Absolutely. This is a reflection of God, and if God weren't love, then nothing else he did would make any difference. That's a great point. So you're seeing this main message here. In fact, would we say if these people would concentrate and put love for one another and for God above everything else, it solved all the problems of chapter 12, wouldn't it? I mean, you were just like, okay, we didn't need to talk about chapter 12 because you guys love each other so much. You're always deferring yourself for the other person, and you're caring about them and their gift, etc. So you can see he sets that right in the middle between 12 and 14 where he's dealing details and just sets up, okay, this is the key thing I want you guys to concentrate on, this idea of love, all right? Really, really good. All right, there's kind of a summary there. So let's back up now a little bit, and let's make a couple of applications or so from 13:1 through 7. So just taking this first section, what would you say is the main thing we should learn from those verses? Okay, what love does, what does it really look like? All right, obviously we have this text is used in weddings and all kinds of stuff, and we pluck it right out. But in the context, he's talking about how we're all treating one another, functioning as a group. In general, as you look back over your experiences in churches and things like that, how well are we doing that? Not so good at times. Not so good at times. And that is a shame. That is a real shame. So one of the things, we'll talk about this in a minute, but one of the things we're going to see is just looking at those individual characteristics of love is pretty challenging. And we'll talk about that in a second. All right, another thought about the main message here, Michael.
You can do a lot of amazing works for God, and they can all be meaningless if you don't.
Yeah. I in my life, I remember some really fantastic preachers, and I was always impressed listening to them and stuff. And then I would have people tell me, "Yeah, but you don't know him." Outside of the pulpit, he is not fun to be with. And, you go, that kind of thing. And it could be true of anybody. We all have to guard ourselves about that. It doesn't matter what your gift is. And if you can just do amazing things, but if you do not have love, it's absolutely worthless. Earlier in 1 Corinthians in chapter 8, verse 1, Paul said, love puffs up. I said that backwards. Knowledge puffs up. Love edifies. All the knowledge in the world, that can just lift you up. But love is what edifies. Very, very important principle that he's given the Corinthians.
Yeah, just a short blurb here. The thing that jumps off the page to me is love is not something I do, it's something I am.
Okay, good. Yeah, and you see it how it bears fruit, but you can't just fake that. It has to be an inner quality. Good, very good. So consider this: how does 13:1 through 7 connect with the last part, 8 through 13? So he's emphasized, you have to have love about everything else. But then notice that verse 13 ends with the greatest is love. So if you took this whole section, he's talking about the emphasis on you're nothing without love. At the end, the greatest of these is love. How would you connect those two sections? A little more challenging question. Jerry.
Still want them to think about their priorities. Make sure the focus is not the gifts. If you're not going to keep it with you, if you're trying to do all these things but you don't have love, you're missing it.
Okay, good. Focus is the gifts. In fact, in that second section, what happens with the gifts? Yeah, they're passing away. What happens with faith, oath, and love? Verse 13, what's the word he uses? Abides. In other words, continues, remains. So here is something permanent: faith, hope, and love. This is where you should concentrate, and the greatest is love. But those gifts are something that was temporary. So they're in the middle of this, and they're thinking, man, the gifts are everything. Man, this is so much fun. I get to, wah. And he's going, really, those things are just temporary. And you need to concentrate on the things that are abiding and permanent, and the things that are really important: your faith, your hope, and your love. That's what you really want to concentrate. It's the same thing as those are the two great commandments. Well, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. If you do these things, everything else in the law falls in place. It's just like the whole thing comes together. So concentrate more on those things than you would a gift or what you can do or what you can produce. Concentrate on love. Your passion for God, your passion and love for each other. Adam?
Well, also, I think, partly to think about us a little bit, so many of the gifts that we see are related to physical gifts.
Sure.
That as we age, we can easily lose. We can have an accident. We can lose multiple abilities or part of our memory. We can't, speak in front of people. And so this idea that they needed to consider the gift that abides, because the other gifts were going to pass away because they weren't needed. For us, we're all blessed with gifts that we might not have in the future because we change. And
Yep.
we grow.
Yeah, good. And so the character itself is more important than the gift, and that's what really endures, and that's what should endure. Very good, very good. Yeah.
And Jerry, I was thinking when I looked at that, it's like the greatest of these is love. But we know without faith it's impossible to please God. So that's a huge thing.
Yes.
But I think when I looked at that, the thing that jumped out at me was, my faith is driven by love. My hope is driven by love.
Exactly.
Love drives all these other things, and it's the basis for all these things.
Yeah, good. Good, and that's what makes it the greatest. That's exactly right. And it's not to diminish faith and hope, but love for God is what causes us to trust Him completely. Love for God is what makes hope motivate us to the goal. All of those things are important within our lives. So very good. Excellent. Excellent. Let me see here. Yeah, before we get this question, I want to go back one thing on a detail here. Should have put this on the screen. But when you look at just the first 3 verses, Paul talking about if I could speak in the tongues of men and angels, have prophetic powers, understand all mysteries. As he talks about those things, there's a figure of speech that he's using. Somebody tell me what it is? All English teachers and literary students. Hyperbole. That's right. He's using a hyperbole here. He's talking about if I were just great at everything, and he's using something that you would not find in any kind of natural human being. But what he's doing is he's using this exaggeration for effect to say if I could do all of those things, but I didn't have love, I would be nothing. So he's really trying to show the Corinthians that to try to excel in those things without excelling in love is a waste of time. That's not the idea at all. So all of those things are hyperboles to stress the importance of not putting your goals and your value in the things you do. To look at it from a standpoint of love. All right, very good. So very quickly, and I want to hit this fairly quickly, because I know it's been months, but we did talk about this section. But 8 through 10, how would you make a quick explanation of 8 through 10? Okay. Gifts are going to pass away. When?
When the perfect comes.
Explain the perfect.
Revelation comes.
Okay. How would you prove that just in this text? Can't go anyplace else. No. Corinthians didn't have another book, chapter, and verse.
So, it talks about how tongues, knowledge, and prophecy end, but faith, hope, and love remain. And so, I think the argument for the spiritual gifts is that this perfect is when we are in heaven, but there is no faith and there is no hope in heaven because it has been realized, it's been actualized.
Okay, good.
So I think that lends to the fact that it's this period of time between them. The full revelation of Christ has come, but we are not yet with us.
Okay, good. You've proven what it isn't. Now let's prove what it is. But that's good. That's very, very important. Okay? Julie.
It says there in part. Prophecy is in part, and knowledge and stuff are in part. So the perfect will be when the part is over, when you've got it
Good.
complete. The perfect
Good.
will be complete.
That's right. Word perfect in verse 10 is in contrast to the words in part in verse 9. Whatever is in part in verse 9 is now perfect in verse 10. Can you recall how the New Testament uses the word perfect? Greek word teleos. Complete. Not meaning, just like when Jesus says, be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. He's not saying perfect, sinless. In the context, he's saying be complete. Love everybody, not like your Father in heaven loves everybody. That's the context. So this is complete. So the word perfect to the modern mind is a little unfortunate in a translation, simply because everybody automatically goes to perfection. No, he's talking about completion. He's talking about your knowledge is in part in verse 9, and now it's going to become complete. And once it's complete, the gifts will be done away. Why would that be? Because it's all revealed, and that's what the gifts were about, was getting this all revealed. So now it's revealed, you don't need it anymore, which I've often made the point that if you had the gift today, you wouldn't be saying anything more than what we could read in the Bible. And you'd stand up and give a gift and say, see my great gift? And I go, wait a minute, that's right over here in this text. We already got that. You're wasting your time. So that's the principle there. Very good. So seeing that then, how would you explain verse 11? Quick explanation. Go.
He's making almost an odd point that the gifts are a sign of maturity. That they have the gifts because they, and I don't just mean they the Corinthians, but they, the church, is immature. It doesn't have everything it's going to need when it is fully grown. So, once we have the perfect, we won't need the thing.
Won't need it. That's right. Yeah. Very good. So it's just like somebody gives up childish games once you become an adult, so we will give this up. Those childish games, as we might say, they were important in our childhood. They helped us. We enjoyed it, all this. But now that we are mature, we don't want to play those games anymore. When I get my grandkids, I think, force yourself to play the game. It's not fun for you; it's fun for them. That's kind of the way that works. All right. Same thing with verse 12. Now we see in a mirror dimly. From their point of view? What would that mean?
Not seeing the whole picture.
Yeah, they're not seeing the whole picture. Their mirrors were not like our mirrors, where you can see crystal, clear of what this. Their mirrors were like looking in a lake and seeing your shadow or something like this. It's not real clear, but when the perfect comes, it's going to be all clear. You're going to fully know what God's message is. That's the idea. And then, as you guys have said in verse 13, the contrast of 13 is the word abide. So if you're circling things in your Bible or whatever, you want to really emphasize that. Some translation will actually say continue. So what's going to continue? What's going to remain? It's going to be faith, hope, and love. And what's going to pass away before that? Well, it's going to be those gifts. And as Nicole said very aptly, that would mean that perfect is not referring to the second coming of Christ, because then you'd have faith and hope in heaven. And I hope when I get there, I won't be hoping for anything, and I won't have faith is the substance of things not seen. I will now be seeing, so that is not going to endure into heaven. So there would be that idea. All right. Any questions about that finally, just on 13? Anything that you say, would you clear this up? Why? This is as much as anything a prep period for all of us to be ready for these kinds of questions. How you would answer them, how you would go about explaining this text. That's very important. In fact, most things I do with you is to help you in that, so that you're like ready on the spot when a question comes up and you can answer that. All right? We good? All right, so let's go on to 14. And let's look at the first 9 verses here. Paul now gives some instructions. Pursue love and earnestly desire the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. For one who speaks in a tongue speaks not to men, but to God, for no one understands him, but he utters mysteries in the Spirit. On the other hand, the one who prophesies speaks to people for their upbuilding and encouragement and consolation. The one who speaks in a tongue builds up himself, but the one who prophesies builds up the church. Now, I want you all to speak in tongues, and even more to prophesy. The one who prophesies is greater than the one who speaks in tongues, unless someone interprets so that the church may be built up. Now, brothers, if I come to you speaking in tongues, how will I benefit you unless I bring you some revelation or knowledge or prophecy or teaching? If even lifeless instruments such as the flute and the harp do not give distinct notes, how will anyone know what is played? And if the bugle gives an indistinct sound, who will get ready for battle? So with yourselves, if with your tongue you utter speech that is not intelligible, how will anyone know what is said? For you will be speaking into the air. There are doubtless, well, that's it. That's where we went. 14, 1 through 9. Okay, so when you just look at that, can we again stop and say, let's summarize the main message here. What is Paul mainly getting across in those 9 verses?
Those of you who like tongue speaking need to be.
Yeah, he gives a pretty good whack on the tongue speakers, doesn't he? And this gives us, especially how much time he spends on this, because he's going to spend the next sections too. But how much time he spends on this indicates that this seems to be the Corinthian problem. They love to get up and yammer in some foreign language, and they think that's the coolest thing on the face of the earth. Can you imagine if somebody raised their hand and said, could I speak to the congregation for a second? You say, oh yeah, sure, brother, stand up, and stands up and speaks to everybody in Russian or Greek or German or something like this, and we're all sitting here going, what are you doing? Oh, I'm showing you the Word of God speaking in German. And you go, but I don't understand you. What good are you doing me? You're not doing any good at all. So it would be that kind of thing, and that's what they're involved with. So main point is you tongue speakers need to understand that what's the primary issue? What would he say the primary issue is?
What's the primary intent?
Yeah, intent and
So this goes back to what you said when you got started. This isn't about you.
yeah.
It's about what you can do for others.
That's
This
right.
is building up of the saints.
Yeah. So
That's really what's important.
if you're using the tongue, what's not happening?
You're not building up.
You're not building anybody up. You're not helping anybody. You're not teaching anybody. And you notice what he says just in that text there in verse 3, upbuilding, encouragement, consolation. So building people up, being able to give people encouragement in their work, to give them consolation is the idea of hope. And so this is what you should be doing, and you're not doing any of those things. All right. So there's the main point. It has to actually reveal something. And same thing in verse 6. How will it benefit unless you bring some revelation, knowledge, prophecy, or teaching? Now, if somebody had a gift and they spoke the word of the Lord in the gift, well, it is the word of the Lord. But nobody can hear it. Nobody can understand it. So it's not teaching. That's the idea. Okay? Yeah.
So what actually is the purpose of speaking in tongues?
That comes later. Yeah, it does. The good question. Excellent. In fact, he's going to answer that question in our next section here. Very good. Very good.
Verse 2 says you're not speaking to God. You're not speaking to people, but to God. Well, you don't have to speak in tongues to speak to God. So it's got another
Yeah.
reason.
So as you brought that up, that's exactly what I had there is when you look at verse 2, let's explain that. For one who speaks in a tongue speaks not to men but to God, but no one understands him, but he utters mysteries in the Spirit. So he's not speaking to men. In other words, nobody understands that. He's speaking to God. God obviously understands it. And in his spirit, he's uttering mysteries. Now, there's different translations to that, like New American Standard Version and NIV. In his spirit, he speaks mysteries. NLT, you will be speaking by the power of the Spirit, but it will all be mysteries. So in other words, you're not understanding it. God understands it, but nobody else understands it. That seems to be the idea. As a matter of fact, if you go down to verse 13, therefore one who speaks in a tongue should pray that he may interpret. So that answers an important question. The tongue speaker who didn't have the gift of interpretation, could he understand what he was saying? Apparently not. Because otherwise he could say, here's what that meant. But he doesn't have that. In fact, somebody else has that gift. So if you're a tongue speaker, who do you want to make best friends with? Yeah, the guy who has the gift of interpretation. You want him standing next to you. It's just like the many times I've gone to India. I can't speak to the Indian Christians in English. Well, some of them would understand, but not all of them. And I can't just stand up and give a lesson on that. I have got to have Benson or Surrender, or one of my good friends there, to stand next to me, and I have to give half a lesson because he's got to interpret. And so to give a 45-minute lesson, the lesson has to be 20-some minutes. Now, don't be saying you wish I would do that. I knew Adam. I stepped right into that, didn't I?
I just wonder how you do it.
That's right. You just wonder how I did it. That's amazing that you could do that. Yeah, stepped in that one. Unbelievable. Inconceivable. That's right. So that's the picture. You had to have an interpreter present then. All right. Explain verse 4. The one who speaks in a tongue builds up himself, but the one who prophesies builds up the church. So how's he building up himself if he doesn't understand?
I think it's back to the chapter on love where he's talking about love is not puffed up. So
Yeah.
he's just doing it to bolster his own
That's right.
reputation.
That's right. Good. So he's just doing it because look at me, and it isn't building up the church. You notice that contrast. Maybe building you up. You may be having a blast with it, but nobody else is having a blast with it. Nobody else is getting anything out of it. Exactly. Very good. All right, let's go to 14. Any other questions about 1 through 9? Okay, let's go on to 14, 10 through 19. Paul says, there are doubtless many different languages in the world, and none is without meaning. But if I do not know the meaning of the language, I will be a foreigner to the speaker, and the speaker a foreigner to me. So with yourselves, since you are eager for manifestations of the Spirit, strive to excel in building up the church. Therefore, one who speaks in a tongue should pray that he may interpret. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my mind is unfruitful. That's pretty good right there, doesn't it? That helps you see what's going on in the tongue speaker. What am I to do? I will pray with my spirit, but I will pray with my spirit, but I will pray with my mind also. I will sing praise with my spirit, but I will sing with my mind also. Otherwise, if you give thanks with your spirit, how can anyone in the position of an outsider say amen to the thanksgiving when he does not know what you are saying? For you may be giving thanks well enough, but the other person is not being built up. I thank God that I speak in tongues more than all of you. Nevertheless, in the church, I would rather speak 5 words with my mind in order to instruct others than 10,000 words in a tongue. Okay, again, let's stop and just go summarize the main point. What's the main point that he is getting across here? Okay, Jerry?
It's about main point, but I can't help but compare. Just recently learned there's this guy that's a Scrabble champion. Speaks English. He learned the entire French dictionary. Can't speak a word of it. Doesn't understand it. But But he won the French Scrabble championship
Wow.
because he memorized.
All he knows is a word. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just thinking like the uselessness of
Yeah.
that is what's coming to mind here.
Good. That's pretty good illustration. Yeah, you know all the words, but you don't understand anything. That's right. You hear the words, but you don't really understand it. Okay, good. Anybody else in a different summation? It's not unlike the previous, is it? It's very similar, but he's just stressing the point that you as a tongue speaker aren't doing any good unless you can interpret, and nobody is getting anything out of it. And therefore, even you yourself personally, verse 16, it seems that they like to pray using this tongue. And he says, well, if you don't understand it, then again, it's just about you. So you need to pray, when you pray in the Spirit, meaning using a tongue, then you need to do so in a way, you need to stop doing that, in other words, so that you can understand it. You need to pray with your mind also. Same with your singing, sing with the mind also. We use that text a lot of times, go, if we're going to sing understanding what you're saying. Well, obviously, that's, you can, I think, them good application of that, Matt.
Maybe it's because I haven't had dinner yet, but the thought that comes to my mind is what was going on in Corinth was there was a lot of sizzle in speaking in tongues, but there was no singing.
That's good. That's
To
good.
the audience,
That's right.
it probably garnered a great amount of attention,
Yeah.
but it was not profitable to the church in terms of learning.
Good, good. It's like that old Peter Pan movie that used to be, and Robin Williams played Peter Pan, and they didn't have any food, and they all pretended they were eating, to try to fill themselves up. It was basically the same thing.
I like what he said because in college I used to sing songs in other languages. I had no idea what I was singing.
That's right.
It would be very simple.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's exactly right. Or for years, in fact, there's still a few Roman Catholic churches that everything is in Latin. And you go in and people love it. They go, oh, it's so beautiful and all. But they don't understand the word he's saying. So nobody's getting built up. So it'd be the same principle that is used here. So let's notice the first thing. At verse 10, he says there's all kinds of many different languages in the world, none are without meaning. So now I just wanted to bring up this question. You go back to verse 1, and he mentioned, if I could speak in the tongues of angels. One of the great claims of our Pentecostal friends is when they're doing their tongues and you say, I don't understand it, what language is that? They'll say, it's angel language. So how would you explain that one?
Doesn't qualify as a true tongue because the true tongue has meaning to someone.
Good. It's not qualifying as a true tongue, meaning the tongues he's talking about have some meaning to someone. And in this text, if you're using it, let's just say you are doing angel language. Doing anybody any good? No. So he's already violating what he's just talking about. Plus, remember 13:1-3 was all hyperbolic. He is speaking in hyperbole here. He's not suggesting that somehow there is an angel language. And it's so interesting that everybody who has the gift today supposedly has nothing but angel language because nobody can understand it. I remember back when I was a young kid, my dad had a very close friend in the church. His name was Melvin Elliott. I will never forget Melvin. He's such a great man. And he didn't even bother bringing an English Bible to church because he could read Hebrew and Greek. And so he just enjoyed reading it from the original, as I would too, as you would too, if you could just read it that way. How cool. I've never boasted about it. I don't think anybody really knew it unless he was teaching a sermon or something like that. But he attended a Pentecostal worship service one time, and somebody would jump up and give a tongue, and then somebody else would jump up and give the interpretation. So at least they were trying to do that. And that kept happening and happening. And so at one point there was a little lull, and Melvin jumped up and gave Psalm 1 in Hebrew. Boom, and sat down. And somebody else jumped up and gave the interpretation. And Melvin stood back up and said, sorry, I was trying to illustrate to all of you that you're not using tongues and your interpretations are not interpretation of the tongue, because I just gave Psalm 1 in Hebrew, and that was not Psalm 1. And they said, would you please leave? Why, we can have more fun. So that was the way that was. But there was a lot of that back in that day. At any rate, so that's an important point here. Other question, yeah, go.
Would it be appropriate, or would it be clearer and appropriate, rather than saying human tongues, just to say human languages?
Yeah.
Because tongues has with it this almost ethereal feel.
Yes, but only because of the abuse of the word in denominational practices, ecstatic kind of language. By the way, be aware, this kind of fervor and ecstatic languages took place long before Christ in pagan religions. So it's not really new. It was just adopted. And there are still religions in the world that do this without any belief in Jesus at all. They get to work up some kind of ecstasy, and then out of that comes some kind of babbling. By the way, where is the? I know I have this later. I'll probably just wait a little later. No, wait, I'll just do it now, and we'll pass over the question and get to it. Where is the only example in the New Testament of the use of speaking in tongues and what it looked like? Acts chapter 2. Duh, right. And so when you look at Acts 2, what is actually happening? Well, number one, the apostles are speaking to a large crowd of people who are believers or not believers? Not believers. In fact, 50 days before, what did they do? They cried out, crucify him. Now, you can imagine what would have happened to the apostles if they stood up and went, impressed? Stone him. Here we go again, No. They had to do something miraculous. There were 17 different countries that were represented there. And when they spoke in these 17 different languages that were unique to the area where they came from. This is like, again, using India as an example. For example, names in my mind. Yeah, Anand. Anand speaks Telugu. Okay, most of the area of southern India was Telugu, but then there were other areas that had other languages. In fact, there's many languages in India. What the Indian government is trying to do is get English all over the place, but you could go to small little pockets, and I'd have to have a different translator. And in fact, Surrender and Benson, they couldn't translate over in those areas. We had to have somebody else. So there's all these different areas, and the apostles are speaking in languages of 17 countries. Remember the first thing they said? What? Are not all these Galileans? It say Galileans, that means they've never had any education. We know Galilee. And there is no educational facilities whatsoever, and nobody from Galilee knows anything. And so they are shocked by this. And then Peter can stand up and actually give them the lesson, because now he's got their attention and they have confidence that he must be telling the truth. So we're going to see later in the text, and we're out of time, we're going to see later in the text, he's going to emphasize that the tongues are not for believers. That was not the purpose of them. It could be used in the church if there's an interpreter, so that there's building up. But the primary use of the tongues was not for believers, it was for unbelievers. So you can imagine, when Paul went to Lycaonia, and the Lycaonian language in Lystra, and he could speak to these people in Lycaonian language, but if that's what he did, we don't know for sure. Or he could have just spoken in Greek, which would have been the common language of the day. But at any rate, you could use that as a miraculous gift as proof. Paul and Lystra used healing a guy in order to give that same thing. Okay? All right. Almost, but not quite. We got quite a ways there. So next time we will look, and I think this is going to be 2 weeks, but next time we will look then at the rest of this text. Now, what we're moving toward is one of the most challenging texts of all, which is verse 26. All the way down to verse 40, and this whole worship period where all these gifts were being used, and in the middle of it he says, women keep silent. So that's going to be our challenge when we get there, and I'm sure that will be something we want to discuss. I've preached about that before, but I'm excited to be able just to talk it through. All of us, work on that and talk it through. Okay, very good. You guys were great, and appreciate what you're doing here. All right, so let's get ready. We will have this opportunity then to conclude our worship with a song and with prayer. Let's stand and sing.